from my side, a very warm welcome and good morning to all our attendees as well as our presenters. I know we're in for a very nice webinar this morning, and we will be diving into the FIA Intermediary Experience Awards Survey feedback and unpacking some of the results that we saw in 2023. Please do make use of the chat functionality. If you have any questions or comments, we'd love to hear from you. And we do have a Q&A functionality as well. Should time allow us, we will ensure to address some of those Q&As that you have put in there. And please feel free to participate, and I hope you enjoy the webinar. On that note, I'm going to hand over to our fearless leader and CEO, Lizelle van der Merwe. Morning, Lizelle.
Morning, Bernard, and thanks for that brief introduction. Yeah, we are literally in between a conference and doing this web, so really just appreciate the team behind the scenes making it all possible, and for those members today who've actually come and are willing to come and hear sort of what the outcomes are of what you have said about product providers, I think is really a move in the right direction. On the call today, we've got Ineke Prinsloo, who's going to be doing this presentation with you. It is an interactive presentation, so please feel free to post your questions on the Q&A. We'll look to answer those as quickly and as efficiently as possible. But I think just to give a little bit of context to what we're doing today, so certainly not since I've been at the FIA have we hosted a webinar where we've given the feedback to members based on the outcomes of the survey. So this is our first initiative. And we really hope that you find that insightful, so please share that with us. What you will see today, that this is the only independent survey that is undertaken by intermediaries to measure their experience with product providers. That's the first and most important thing. Your service to your clients is directly impacted on the service that you receive from product providers. And we know that post-COVID, the service standards from product providers remains a challenge. We do know because members tell us about that. And it's critical that we use a survey such as this to not only improve the outcome for our businesses and clients, but more importantly, that we all collectively participate, because the more participation, obviously, the better our influence. To understand your expectations from product providers, what we did last year is we incorporated a diagnostic element, which Ineke is going to elaborate on. So what is it that you mean when you say service? What is it that you mean when you say trust? So that diagnostic element we're going to delve into in a little bit more detail today. And just to let you know, we actually meet with the exco teams of the top product provider companies, and this includes Santam, Old Mutual, Discovery, Momentum. There's a whole lot of them that we've met with since November and into the early sort of months of this year. And what we do is we share with them the outcomes of the survey and then how their brands have actually measured up against their competitors and the 7 standards of excellence that you have established for your businesses. So it's important because we know insurers are highly competitive, and then they like to see sort of where they're good, where they're weak, and then how they're performing in overall relation to the 9 different categories. The survey, as I said at the AGMs a couple of weeks ago, is really scratching the surface for us. We have big plans to increase the participation, obviously for the ultimate benefit of our members. And I really hope you guys feel encouraged by the collective voice of FI members making a difference to intermediated distribution in South Africa. So when you see these insights, I really hope you feel encouraged. But Ineke, on that note, given the time pressure, I'm going to hand over to you. We've got to get through quite a lot. And if there are any questions, members, please feel free to ask them. Thanks, Ineke. Over to you.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning, everybody. Welcome on what is a rainy morning in Gauteng this morning. So I am really, really looking forward to giving you the feedback. As Lizelle said, this is interactive. This is, I think, the most important event on the calendar for this particular initiative for FIA. So I'm going to take you through a couple of slides. There's a lot more information, but it's really about picking what is it that we want to communicate to members of the FIA in this particular session. And I think to start with, just 2 or 3 slides and a lot of technicality behind it, but I'm really going to highlight, how does this work? How do we get to these results? You will see many benchmarks. They are a dime a dozen. But what does this benchmark do? When you get the benchmark, why is it important that you participate and know that something is actually being done with the results? So I'm going to really touch very quickly on how do we conduct the benchmark. First of all, there's an instrument. There's a questionnaire that we ask. But we need intermediaries that are qualified respondents. And a qualified respondent is someone that has got a qualified opinion. So if the intermediary has only dealt with one aspect of the product provider in one instance, it's very difficult to be able or to be in that credible position to rate across the board with the product provider and really give them feedback how they need to improve from their product to their business enablement to their service to the intermediary. So there is a questionnaire that we put together, and actually that questionnaire has been running for a number of years. And Lizella started to touch on it, that there's what's called a diagnostic. What it simply means is that in the questionnaire, we ask the 7 standards of excellence, and underneath them, we ask extra questions so that we kind of get to that second layer of what is the driver. So if we speak about service, what is the driver of service? So it's always a trade-off in terms of the time to fill it in, but we do ask the intermediary or yourselves as the members, we ask, have you engaged? Have you worked with this product provider? Select the product provider that you would like to rate. And then we do it for the member experience through a digital platform. We all are pressed for time, but there also needs to be security concern or security taken into account. So it's a specific member, you get specifically assigned a code, and you get the survey so that there's no block bookings, there's no forwarding, and we try and make sure it's the right person that answers the survey that ensures that we get the correct answers. So it's all digital. You can start doing it on your iPad and you can continue on your phone. It is yours to complete. And then the last component of doing this survey is about the trustworthy results. Now, there's 110 ways to do this, and there's probably just 10 right ways to do this. We need to know that what we give back as feedback is credible. We need to know that we've done the checks and balances, that when we give the feedback, it's more than just for the awards evening. It's about really making sure that there's measurable KPIs. There are things that we can hang our hat on and saying, this is where you landed in a performance relative to the competitors, but as a voice, what the intermediary is giving you, and we can trust these results. Again, there are many of these benchmarks out there, and it's simply not worth the paper that it's written on. So we do go through a rigorous process, both in the questionnaire and in how we do the analysis, and have it audited through 3 independent audits to make sure that the results are actually the right results. So that's really in a nutshell what happens with a survey. And I think Lizelle has touched on this. Why does this particular one matter? And I'll give you the straight up answer: because it's being used, because it's being actively used. There's a difference between a poll and a benchmark. Benchmarks, and especially when we speak to product providers, and I've served on a lot of boards within product providers, it's always the question, how do we do? What does good look like? Are we the leading provider? Are we the lagging provider? If we're leading, by how far are we leading, and can we differentiate? Or are we lagging, and should we catch up? So we really engage with them in a constructive manner based on what Lizelle has also said is the de facto voice of the intermediary. There is no other survey in this market, and I've done this for 25 years. There is no other survey in this market, and I would say benchmark, that has a similar credibility. and is really targeted and focused. We know who's answering it, and we know why we're doing it, and we know what we're doing with it. So it's the second point there is really about, what do we do with this? Well, it's the recognition. It is important to recognize the product providers that have done well on the benchmark, because it's the intermediaries, the members of FIA, that's saying, on this objective standard, you have done well. But as Lizelle also said, it's about the reporting. So how we then post the awards, post the beautiful and glamorous evening, what do? We are then extensively engaging with product providers and helping through the insights that we have in the survey to start effecting change that is to the benefit of the intermediary, as the intermediary has given their voice, but ultimately to those end clients of the financial services industry. And that is the broader stakeholder picture. It's about effecting that change, being very, very clear from a point of confidence that this is a true statement of fact, given by a broad range of intermediaries, people that are in the industry that deals with the product providers, and ultimately the change affected not just for you, but for your current and your future clients. So now I'm going to take you through a couple of slides, and this is where we get into the detail of the survey. And as Lizelle also said, and Bernard said in the beginning, it is an interactive. I see there's Q&A. So I'm going to gauge in terms of time. I think we're doing good on time. If there are questions, please let's make this interactive. Maybe I'm just looking at my watch and I'm seeing that we have a little bit of time. So just in terms of the methodology and how we do it and the why we do it, is there a pressing question maybe? Bernard, if I can refer, I just see in the Q&A block.
Thank you, Ineke. Simeon asks, what number of members respond to the survey?
Brilliant question. Absolute brilliant question. And it's absolutely relevant. So I think, and you've actually, I don't know if you've seen my survey before or my presentation beforehand. So out of the just over 11,000 members that we have with the FIA, we every year have around 5,000 contracts rated. Now that translates to about 1,200 to 1,700 individuals that answer. And if you do any sort of these benchmarks, it is a brilliant. It's one of the best response rates that we do have. So there's a couple of things on that, is that it obviously, the more information you have, the more granular you can analyze, the more reliability you have, although there's a small point on it. You don't need more sample to be able to have more accurate answers. You just have more accurate granularity. You can deep dive into it. But we really have a very good response rate. But the more we have response rate, the more we can deep dive into the categories, deep dive into the product providers, and collate more information. So I just want to check that I've answered the question. And I see there's another Q&A that's popping up. So I'm going to allow one or two, and then I'm going to go on, and then I'll stop again so that I can make sure that there's some questions and there's opportunity to ask questions.
Lovely, Ineke. So Guy in the Q&A asks, do you differentiate between the experience of supporting advisors who get preferential services versus non-supporters who tend to get call centers?
So also great question. The straight answer is no, not necessarily differentiating between that. But as I said, there's also a couple of in the instrument in terms of the level of engagement. So it's typically the intermediary or the member that has a binder and extensively engages with the product provider, that would answer the survey or be eligible to answer the survey. If it's somebody that's just dealt once or twice with the call center, then it's not necessarily going to be somebody that is eligible or would be able to answer the questions. There's also a differentiation, I think, where your question's going, Guy, in terms of the product providers that got different service levels. So I have got a specific special ring fenced for my high producing intermediaries on my book of business versus everybody else that's going through a service model that only entails call centers. We won't necessarily see that in the way that we're asking our questions, but we could ask that so that it's just another layer that we can add in terms of the analysis of that. I think it may be when we get into the service aspect, it's actually a good thought for the future. And that's exactly why we're doing this webinar, is also to get your input. So it's actually sparked a thought in terms of how we can expand and better on this. So actually, thank you for that question. All right. So as I said, we've got quite a good sample of responses every year. It's from the FIA members. We don't quota. It's across the South Africa. It's diverse roles. So maybe, Lizelle, if I can ask you, and again, this is interactive, if you just want to just talk in terms of the roles, specifically relating to the FIA membership, then we can just expand on that.
Well, I think, members would fully understand and appreciate that representatives and key individuals are the representatives who are afforded equal opportunity to participate in the survey. So we don't just put a weighting on Guy's experience, who's the CEO, because he's now going to get preferential treatment from any product provider if he escalates a query, but actually anyone in your business has equal opportunity to share their experience across the categories of product providers. So it is the key individuals and representatives on the FIA database, whether they are acting under supervision, whether they have 10 years experience, there's no differentiation. It is that category of members on our database who get equal opportunity to participate. So I don't know, Ineke, if that clarifies the question,
Yeah,
but just
perfect.
It is across the board. Okay.
Perfect. I think it's just a good clarification in terms of the roles, and that there's no differentiation and where but we do have line of sight from the managed database. And again, that's what differentiates this from any other benchmark, is that there's so much opportunity and depth beyond just the questionnaires to truly understand and differentiate between the different service levels. Then the last thing, you would come across a lot of benchmarks and a lot of research. And I would tell you the first thing that you ask before you even look at the results is, what is your reliability? What is the R squared if somebody ran a regression analysis? And you really see a lot of these surveys in South Africa that's got a 50%. I mean, you can just take a coin and flip a coin and you can have the same effect. We do run this rigorously. Sometimes I think there's a sense or a pushback when one goes into the technicality, but you've got to make sure that what we're doing here, we can repeat, and what we say is truthful, and we can hang our hats on it. So we run the model across all 5,000 answers that we get, and we make sure that we have a true test for reliability. And in this particular instance, we're running just at 92%, just over 92%, which in most benchmarking research, actually people would accept 80%. So typical bell curve, we're in the 92%. And that's something that's around the quality that I think the FIA committee and the EXCO is very clear on, is that this needs to be something that holds true to what we're saying in that. So always just ask, if you're looking at a piece of research, is this valid? Is this credible? And I think it's very important to get that message out there in terms of how we run the survey. Now we're going to get into some of the results. So there's about 5 or 6 slides in the decks and some of the information that we have 60 to 80 slides. And I would really invite you on different occasions to engage and understand a bit more. There's really valuable insights in here. So just from a high level, what do we see? And again, when you look at research, and they will give you a sample realization, who participated, and they often glance over it. And I said, no, let's have a look what the intermediaries are telling us. What is happening in the industry? Can we use some of the sample realization, the people that participated, to get some predictive capability on what will happen with binder agreements? Is it something that tells us something that's happening in the industry? And actually it does. This slide just looks at the brands spontaneously rated. So in the survey, you as the respondent can pick the brands that you know that you work with the most. But typically you would select those that you work most, and then there's a couple of other questions that just qualifies that. What this slide tells us, alongside the 5,000, 6,000 contracts that we get that are rated annually, is that intermediaries do want to participate. Members want to participate. They select more brands. They select more diverse brands. It tells me something of the market movement. We get the feedback. We look at the shifts in the market. And if you are a product provider, and I'm going to make the proviso here, is I'm very data-led. I'm not product provider-led. I'm data-led. If you are a product provider and coming from a background of strategy, you would want to look at market share. And I always say this to the product providers. When you measure your market share, you look at the premiums, the numbers of members, the numbers of policy contracts, the investments, the assets under management. This is the members of the FIA, the intermediaries, that is giving you an additional KPI, a market share KPI, share of voice. Do I opt to rate you? Positive or negative, it doesn't mean, and I'll get to the model, it doesn't mean more people, I get 1,000 people to rate me, I win this. No, it's not that easy because there's a model behind this. But this just says that you can look on the right-hand side, more brands are being selected to rate. Intermediaries are going beyond the 1 or 2 binders, going beyond just all of the big product providers. And I'm not saying they're good or bad. This just says to us the competitive field is opening up. More in some of the categories, more because there's new entrants, but some are returning. We've seen in the non-life commercial category, the similar slide, that the product providers, the 5 product providers that held the biggest share of intermediary voice, and I'm coining that KPI, lost 25% of that voice in the previous measure and again 15%. So we do see some movements, and the intermediaries and the members are telling something to the product providers. And we're saying that to them. Start looking at what the competitive measures. You would like to retain a voice of intermediary market share alongside your hard measures, which are your financial measures and your product density and your assets under management. So that's the first thing. I do see there's a question. I'm going to come back to it. I'm going to do 2 slides and then I'm going to come back to the question. What I'm highlighting now are the key themes for 2023. So there's a lot of insights, but if we really just take that 10,000 foot view, the first thing is around product quality. Now, there's a very strong narrative in the industry, and having been in the industry, the product is the differentiator. And my personal hypothesis is actually being kind of supported through 3 years of this data collection. And the benchmark is much older than that, but just in the last 3 years, is that product quality or product is not that differentiated. It could be, but it's a whole different strategy. There's, in more than one of the categories, actually parity. And remember, this is voice of members saying there's actually parity. Product importance in the previous one, when we get to the 7 standards of excellence, you're going to see it was lower in importance, but market movements, market context, operating context, it's changed. The sentiment around it has changed. The operating conditions has actually, in this round, brought a little bit of a renewed importance on product. But product is not the differentiator that is possibly going to support the populist narrative around it. Then on the right-hand side here at the top corner, service quality, and you're going to see that service has just exponentially moved up the ranks on importance for intermediaries. Remember, Lizelle also spoke about the diagnostic. So if we talk about service and it has increased in importance, what does that mean? So we do the first layer of service and see how does it compare to the other standards of excellence. And then I'll show you a little bit in terms of then what do we deep dive? What does service mean? And what is that feedback? But it's really jumped by 30%, 31% in this measure. Now, if you're a little bit technically minded or inclined, any jump of 30% would raise red flags. But remember, I said we run this through 3 audits. So one of them is actually a blind audit. So we take the raw data, and we actually get somebody that has got no vested interest, that is experienced, run the data, and then see if they can confirm or challenge the result. And all 3 audits were 100% on the mark of what the original findings were. In the middle block, we have trust. Now, insurance, financial services, the cornerstone of this relationship and of the product, whether it's in the investment, whether it's in the medical category, it's trust. Trust that there's a monetary exchange for an outcome, for ensuring a future peril, for helping me when I have a health challenge, for helping me to invest my or run my investments. And it's just interesting that in this industry, intermediaries are giving a message to the product providers that the fundamental is under pressure, that trust. None of these things are mutually exclusive. They do run together. So there's a cause and effect here. But it's very interesting that trust has become something that is almost not where you would see it. And a lot of the benchmark I've seen is trust is always that number one thing. So it's just taking a note of that. Then differentiation. In some categories, there are still differentiation, but in others not. And I will also speak to some brands that have actually had a good strategy that differentiated in categories where the totality of the performance were under pressure. And then I spoke about this, the competitive dominance, where we see the loss of market share. So I'm going to stop for about 90 seconds, Bernard, and let's take 1 or 2 questions before I move on.
Lovely. Thank you, Inaka. I see Andre Jacobs has asked, what is the difference between this and the orange index relating to service?
So Andre, I actually worked with the Orange Index when I was still in insurance. Orange Index works on a B2C. It's a retail index. The sample size is around 100 people that are interviewed from different categories and randomized. So the person is asked, do you have a momentum health or do you have a discovery invest? And would you then like to answer the question on certain service questions? Some of the service questions would be fairly the same because, I mean, if you ask about service, what is your satisfaction with service? That's a question that anybody would use. And then the biggest difference is in the model, is how we run the model. It's how do we get to the weighting of the different aspects that then represents what is the true voice of the intermediary. So I hope I've answered that question, but happy to take some more questions later on.
Thank you, Inika. I see you also mentioned, I agree that there is a movement in terms of product providers. However, my discussion with leaders are a consolidation of contracts in future. I think that's more of a statement. Willie Lowe has a question for us as well. During the previous FIA management, a thought for an agri-broker segment was considered. These brokers focuses on the agri-farmers market, which is quite different with the limited product suppliers from the normal business or personal lines. How is the agri-market represented in this survey?
So a quick answer on that. Agri would be under the commercial. And I think there was good debate in terms of the specialist commercial versus the generalist commercial. So we do have a split in how we can analyze generalist versus specialist commercial, but there's not specifically a category yet for the lines of business, being the guarantee, agri, engineering. That is something that we have debated to bring in. The more participation we get, the more we can go into that granularity. So it is something that has been debated, and Lizelle can maybe also talk to this, that there is actually a committee that looks at the questionnaire and then gives guidance and advice on the granularity, because there's a trade-off in terms of how many people will participate and how long it will take. But most certainly, under the commercial category, specialist, we probably would be able to ring fence agri and just make it a tick mark also for people to fill in.
Thank you, Inika.
Okay, good. All right, we'll come back to some of those questions, but let's move on. All right, so now I spoke about the top level measurement. So we've got shifts in what's most important. 7 standards of excellence, those things that we consistently measure every year that we ask. And this is also what determines the winners, but not on a straight calculation. So I can't just get 1,000 intermediaries to vote me 10, 10, 10, 10, 10 on this. That's what happens with a lot of benchmarks that doesn't employ a model the way that we do. We take those 5,000 or 6,000 contracts and or the ratings, we run the regression analysis, and then we get a weighting. And remember what I said, this is the voice of the intermediary. So what is most important? We do check for outliers, so people that spend 30 seconds and just rated 10 or just rated 1, we typically do all the statistical sampling error and make sure that we really apply our minds to the weighting. Now, the first thing you will see is, so there's a legend for you on the top right-hand side that you will see 2019 is always the dark blue, then the lighter blue 2022, and then the teal colored 2023. These are the standards of excellence, so that top level measure, and how the weighting changed over the 3 measurement periods. And you can see there, I spoke to this, the 30%. Service across category, whatever product, whatever line of business, I, as an intermediary, value service. And that's where the stability of the model also comes in, and where we run that we understand that it's about 92%. Enablement is, how do I help you as an intermediary to better your business, to run your business? And I'll speak to that elements in the diagnostic as well. It's this very popular ease of business, and I find a lot of excos debating ease of business, and I always say to them, you know, you measure ease of business, but if you don't know what it is, then don't measure it. Ease of business is that perception of the level of effort that I have to extend to get to my goal. If I am an intermediary and I have a client and I need to change an address, but I need to change the address for the non-life on one provider, and I need to change the address for the investment on another product provider, it's effort to do that, or I have to phone the call center. So it's that accumulation of perception of effort, repeat, not getting feedback, checking in again, looking for something that takes up my time, something that compels me to do something more than once, again, or longer, is what enablement or disenablement is about. And it's interesting that the intermediaries actually, in the diagnostic, the digital was a -3, and it's always interesting to do these presentations. It doesn't say that digital is not important, but the moment that I have a complex digital platform that requires additional effort from the intermediary, it almost disenables. That's what it says. Now, if I just look at something like product, if you just want to focus at product, in the 2022, so 2019 to 2022, product was only measured at a 2%. And immediately the question was, okay, so product's not important. That's not what this says. When you do a model like this, it just says that relative to others, product was less important. Relative to the other 6 standards of excellence, TCF in this measure had a lower level of importance for the members that rated. And when I then take all of the ratings that a product provider received and I re-weight it and add that up, I get to their final score. So what does that say? If I then say that a product provider is the best in category on that score of 85 or 79 or 77, which you will see, it is all the scores that they received, re-weighted, and then added up, which means it's not about a pay for play. It's not about I can just hedge my bets on one thing. It's the product provider that has the balanced, best performance across the board. It's your all-rounder. And that's what you want. But you also, as a product provider, need to stay close to your intermediary, need to stay close to your intermediary or your distribution line, so that you know where the focus is and where you need to do better. This just tells you by how much you need to do better, or where you can focus a little bit less where there's parity in the industry. So I hope that makes sense in terms of how we finally get to the winners and how logic prevails in terms of, I can say I'm the best in the industry. I have won this benchmark. I can put it out there because based on what a collective voice of intermediaries from a known database, the FIA membership, has given as feedback and then aggregated to give the appropriate weighting, what is relevant, and how you perform on that gives you a score. So you can get 10 out of 10 for TCF. I'm not saying it's not important, but that's not going to get you the accolade where the intermediaries have said you are the best in the industry at this point in time. It is the collective of that. And if we then move on, just in terms of the service, enablement, product relationship, the things I talked about it, you can see there's service. When we break it down, it's about the efficiency to deal with my queries. It's about the resolution time. How long do you take to sort it out? And again, these categorizations, all the responses I received in the survey, rerun and then given a weighting. What is most important? And I spoke about enablement. There's ease of business, focused practices, collaboration. Digital solutions doesn't mean it's not important, but it's a message to the product providers that a digitally led is not necessarily going to be the winning strategy in an intermediated. It supports, it enables. But if you make it difficult for me to do business, it is not going to be the winning strategy. And I think the last thing I might actually just add here that product providers also ask us is that, okay, so complaints are not important. No, intermediaries are saying to you, relative to getting it right the first time, service, don't spend time, effort, and resources to build the best complaints model in the world. Have complaints and make sure that you tend to complaints, but don't trade that off for getting it right the first time. An efficient service that talks to efficiency, that you deal with my queries, that you do it in an acceptable time, and that your staff is professional and knowledgeable. So that's how we do some of the reporting back to them. So now I'm going to touch on outcomes, and then I'm going to stop, and I'm hoping there's going to be a lot of questions. I spoke about the best of the best. So there's always, it's great to get the accolade, and the award is, it's really about recognizing excellence. But we calculate excellence in a very, very balanced way and in an appropriate way. So when we then say best of the best, these are the 9 categories. So if you have a look, there's commercial. So this is your non-life categories: commercial, corporate, EB, product lump sum, investments, savings, medical schemes, PL, your risk, and underwriting management agencies. And I think to the earlier question, the name escapes me now, so agri would be under commercial insurers, but a specific LOB under commercial insurers. What this slide tells you, across the board, who were the best of the best for 2019, 2020, and 2023. The first thing that should draw your eye is this 80 line. Now, in benchmarking, internationally, 80 on any satisfaction score, 80 is regarded as that mark that you aspire to. Any score between 75 and 80 on a proper benchmark is regarded as a good score. It's not always a competitive score, but it's a good score. Any score 75 to 70 is average. Anything below 70 is a dissatisfaction score. So if we ever had in any of these categories that collective share of voice that rates any product provider or category below 70, it follows there's not going to be a best of the best category. There's not going to be a product provider that can be considered the best and the excellence that is being recognized in the awards. Any score above 80 is really a good score on a ratified benchmark, on a proper benchmark. What you can see here is in different categories, there were different scores across the measurement periods. For instance, if you now think about the market share that I spoke about earlier, the share of voice, where you have your commercial insurers here, the score for the best in the category is still above the 80. but it's slightly lower than the previous year. If we look at personal lines insurance, this category is declining. So intermediaries are giving a strong voice, a strong message back to the product providers that overall, this category is below that 80 benchmark. The best performing product provider scored a 77.9. Interesting in medical schemes, Discovery Health score on 2019 was exactly 82.56. They won the category. So we've got to understand when we do this, what do we mean by? We do recognize the excellence, but compared to, contrast and compare, there are certain categories where this score is a brilliant score and actually improved. We look at the EB, where Momentum Corporate, they were EB last year or the previous year, actually improved their score in a category that is, the average is declining. So these were the winners. How did we get to the score? 5,000 contracts, run over the regression analysis, all your scores that you received, reweighted, and then added up to get the all-rounder that performed well on what Intermediary said is important. And this is just a slide to show you. I have randomized this. I've taken some of the top 10, I've taken some brands just to show you. So if, for instance, we take Discovery Health, you see the 82.54. There you see the 82.54. This is what I've been talking about. So service in blue, if it carries a 30% weighting and you got good scores on that, you would have a good score here and all your scores would be following. But you can see where, and if I then take last or the previous, where service was a 30, it's actually interesting. I had a look this morning on Sanlam Glacier, and again, brand agnostic, is that this enablement was half of what the score was for Sanlam Glacier for the totality of the previous, and they had a higher score. So it's just in terms of those shifts and giving them the message back to the product providers. What do you need to do compared to the industry, compared to the category, compared to what your performance was last year, and looking at what a best in benchmark is. And that gives a really powerful message to the service providers. Then my last slide, and I think then we can go to Q&A, is, what are the common challenges? I spoke about the 7 standards of excellence, service 30%, underneath service, those different aspects. And across the board, dealing with queries efficiently, that's an operations focus. And timeously, staff, processes, red tape. That ease of business is important across the board. It does not differentiate across or in any of these categories. That's what's important to intermediaries. Then competent, empowered, and responsive staff. And I think there was a question earlier around, I deal with ring-fenced BDM, or I deal with the call center. Differs a little bit between the different categories on professionalism and responsive. If I deal with call center, there's a bit more of a focus on, I need responsive staff. If I deal with non-life commercial, or I deal with some of the wealth categories, some of the investment categories, that is technically quite difficult categories or technically involved categories, then I need competent and knowledgeable staff. But across the industry, there's a problem around talent and skills retention. That again is the message back, and that's what a higher message is for the FIA back to product providers on how do we deal with this talent and skills challenge across categories and industry. Then finding ways to reduce perceived effort. I have spoken about that, the amount of hoops. If we do bring in digital, how does that not make my life more difficult more time and effort that I have to expend. And I've also spoken about the digitally led or enablement. And I think a lot of this, if you take as my last comment on this, is that these are higher themes, and I've given you themes and there's lots of detail, but there's so much to engage and take the industry forward that not everything can be done in 1 year. And that's why there's also focus on certain things, focus on the service, focus on what the intermediaries are giving you as a feedback. So I'm going to maybe open up, Bernard, they say we've got about 10 minutes. I think we are dead set on time. I think there's opportunity to ask questions, and I'd also like to invite Dizal, Lelani, if there's anything, and for the members to pose questions and let's answer them.
Yeah, thanks, Ineke. Maybe while members, I have answered a few questions in the chat, one particularly around the UMAs. And Lauren, absolutely. I mean, UMAs are an important stakeholder in our lives as brokers. But the problem is there's just so many. So I can choose them, there's 30 plus of them. And if you don't have sufficient sampling for each of those UMAs, you actually can't then do the proper diagnostic and the outcomes that we can do on other product provider brands where there is sufficient sampling. So what Ineke said we can look at doing is maybe doing high-level insights based on the 300 people or the 300 respondents on the UMA category. We can look to do some high-level insights into what the general sort of sense was amongst brokers with UMAs, but it's such a difficult category to rate because there's always a challenge with sampling. So that is the issue there. And then just maybe the point on what we're doing. So the outcomes, we have extensive engagements with product providers. And because no product providers are on this call, and one of them in particular says to us the other day, this is just terrible. We have the best product in the market. How is it that brokers do not rate that as the most important thing for clients? Because it's the best product. It's best for clients. And we had to say to the product provider in a very polite and respectful manner, you can have the best product in the world, but if you cannot deliver this to me efficiently, on time, the first time, I will find an alternative for the client. So as Ineke says, you need the balance of those 7 standards to really get the best possible outcomes for you as members and ultimately for the clients that we serve. And what we were saying at the AGMs, for the first time, we've done a report for the Council of Medical Schemes. In the medical schemes industry, to demonstrate to the regulator that there's healthy competition in medical schemes, number one. So the perception that we favor a particular scheme is not true, because you can see from the survey and the participation that there's an increase in brands and participation. The level at which the medical schemes service standard operates, that it is at a high standard in relation to other categories, and also to demonstrate to them that this is what brokers do in order to make sure that they get good outcomes for their clients. And it was very well received. We haven't done this yet for the FSCA, but we, as I said, we've done it for the Council of Medical Schemes. And then there was a final point I just wanted to make, was on collective participation, because as Ineke says, the more people who participate, the deeper insights we have. So we're really looking to leverage this, because it is your benchmark, as you own it. This is the IP of the FIA. No one owns this IP, you own it. And it really is trying to see how we can get more FSPs to participate and expand that voice within the FIA and use it, like you say, Ineke. It's not just a report that we send out to industry. We have extensive engagements for 4 months at a time on these outcomes with product providers. And Ineke, we said you were going to look particularly with Old Mutual, where we had challenges with Old Mutual, and they had made some strategic shifts in their business. And then we saw the impact that had over 3 years. So we are working with Old Mutual to see if we can build a case study around that, to be able to show members what insurers have now done with it and how that has benefited the results, the overall results 3 years down the line. So, maybe just in a nutshell, that is also what's happening behind the scenes. It's a full-time job. It really isn't a once-off. It's not a once-off survey that we run and then we just send the outcomes and we give people a couple of awards and we write a couple of newspaper articles. Absolutely not. This is a full-time job. This thing runs for like 8 months of the year. The survey runs in the background, from preparation, getting it to market, analyzing results, analyzing the winners, doing the awards ceremony. Then we go into consultative processes. So it's a full-time job at the FIA.
Amazing. Thank you, Lizelle.
You're happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I think we have answered the questions in the Q&A. I do see one popping in. It's from Andre. That product provider's comment is, sorry?
It's in the medical schemes, Andre. So Andre, he writes here, he says, the product provider's comment is sad. Which product provider believes that they have a bad product? Who informs them that they are better than other brands? And that's the problem with product providers. They really are so isolated in their own world. And that's why a collective voice of businesses like ours is so powerful, because it's independent, it's diverse. It's not me going to my own brokers who are only dealing with me and getting an opinion on my service standards. I'm going into the market where independence is our differentiator, where service is a differentiator, where my expectations of product providers are of a high standard. So really, this is, I can't, I mean, must we say who it is, Yannicka? No, we're not going to say who it is, because they are a very prominent brand. But we just said to them, guys, you can have the best product, but ultimately you have to deliver on all these standards. You can't just be a product differentiator and think brokers are going to support you because you've got a great product.
Mm.
It's one of the elements, as Yannicka said. It needs to be balanced.
Yeah. I think that's a great point. Thank you, Lizelle. Yeah, and thanks again, Andre, for that comment. Definitely something to take note of. I see our time is almost up. I just wanted to quickly read out another one from Andre as well, which caught my eye, to say I really commend you and the FIA on an excellent project. The results are trustworthy and reliable. I trust that product providers will embrace the results and not see us as the enemies. Those brands are lacking, will lack in future, and may disappear unless they change their ways. We vote with the feet of our clients, and I quite like that personally, to be honest. And Mbabeni says, great presentation, and a few other compliments to you, Yannicka, and the team as well, for an excellent and insightful presentation. I'd like to ask if there's any closing remarks from the team, and then we will allow people to jump off and enjoy the rest of their day. Thank you again from my side. Closing remarks from the team, and have an amazing afternoon to everyone that attended. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good afternoon. Thanks, Yannicka and Lalani and Bernard. Have a good one.
Thank you, everyone. Yeah, I think just maybe as a last final remark, just to encourage our members, to participate when we commence the next round of the survey in June. As Lizelle and Yannicka has also mentioned, the collective voice is really strong when we go and provide that feedback to the product providers who have really engaged with us, in the results, so whether they win or lose. So the more members that participate, the bigger our voice. And also, this is, like Lizelle said, this is an FIA survey. So this is really our members' platform to provide, feedback to product providers. And there are many other, surveys out there, but this is really your survey. So I think this is really important for you, to participate in the FIA survey once we, kick off. And thank you for just that bit from our side.
Thanks, Lalani. Thanks, everyone. Have an amazing day, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.